The word fair gets used a lot in life, and there's no doubt that we all can agree that an election should be fair. But what does that mean? Well, back in the 40s, there was a guy named Kenneth Arrow who came up with a list of things that would make an election fair. So, what are they? Well, the first one's pretty straightforward. If there's a candidate who wins the majority of the first place votes, they should win the election. Straightforward, right? The next one is called the Condorcet criterion. Now, in this one, the idea is if there's a candidate who beats every other candidate in a pairwise comparison, that candidate should win the election because they're preferred by everyone or by the majority of people over every other candidate. Then there's a criterion called the monotonicity criterion. Now, on this one, the idea is if some candidate wins the election and some other voter would have put them potentially higher on their ballot or went back and changed their ballot to put them higher on the ballot, that person should still win the election. Again, pretty straightforward, hopefully. And the final one is the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. And what this means is that the winner of the election would still be the winner if one or more of the irrelevant, the people who didn't win, alternatives dropped out of the election. Now, having these fairness criterion is huge. It lets us list out, these are the things that we need to make an election fair. But the thing that Kenneth Arrow did that's even bigger than that is he showed that you can't have all four of these things. It's impossible for an election held with more than two candidates to be fair in all four of these ways. In fact, all of the ways of counting votes that we've looked at so far, the plurality method, the border count method, the plurality with elimination method, and the method of pairwise comparisons, they all break at least one of these fairness criterion, and between all of them, they break all of them. So we saw that the plurality method can break the Condorcet criterion. It also can break the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. So this is the thing that we see play out in our elections actually in the United States, where you might have a third-party candidate who, if they dropped out of the election, another person might have won the election. And our method is basically a plurality method of counting votes. Now, the border count method, a lot of people prefer this method and think that it seems a lot more fair, but it's actually capable of breaking the majority criterion, the Condorcet criterion, and the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion. So the only one it's guaranteed to satisfy is the monotonicity criterion. Plurality with elimination, again, one that people like a lot and in fact are adopting, seems like it would be pretty fair, but the only criterion it's guaranteed to satisfy is the majority criterion. It's capable of breaking the Condorcet, the monotonicity, and the independence of irrelevant alternatives criteria. And the method of pairwise comparisons. Now, this is one that people tend to think is too much work and everything, but there's a payoff for that work. The only one of these criteria that method can break is the independence of irrelevant alternatives criteria. So the pairwise comparisons guarantees to satisfy the majority, the Condorcet, and the monotonicity criteria. Even though all of these possibilities exist, this doesn't mean that every election is unfair. It just means that every election has this built-in possibility that it could be unfair. So that doesn't mean that a given election is actually going to violate any of these. Some specific things have to happen with the vote counts in order for these fairness criteria to be violated. So take a look at some examples. and try to see like what type of thing happens with the votes to have these things be violated. Also, just because these things can be violated doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be working towards having better elections and having fair elections. We shouldn't give up hope. It's not all doom and gloom.